Thank you so much. All right. How many of you have built or you use design systems? Oh, okay. All right. So you build a design system because speed, quality, reusability, da 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 da, etc. etc. And you think that everything is fixed, right? Because that is the answer for building a design system. That's how you guys like get a buy-in, right? But really, let's imagine this. So you have a button. Uh, you know what tokens are, I'm assuming. So you had like, say, background primary as a token name, which points to a hex value. That's how everyone does it, right? The reason why we introduce tokens is that it's an alias to your hard-coded values, and you're like, okay, if someone wants to change this primary blue to primary green, you just have to just change the color, right? But is that it? Who will change it on code? What if the designer communicated to the developer, but the developer maybe forgot? Maybe it just slipped off their mind, right? Because there are like two different tools. Figma, where all the design happens, and then code, where your actual code of those components reside. Another example. This is a button which had like border radius of like 4 pixel, but we changed it on Figma, and the same story happens, right? So does it really fixes your problem? Or I would say the problems have now increased exponentially, right? Because now you have bought your entire, like all your teams and all the projects onto design system, and you messed up at the design system level, which means the problem that was like in individual projects is now at the global level. And if there's some miss, it might just mess up entire like all other applications. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Like, how do you put your design language on autopilot, right? So I'm Kamlesh. I work at Razorpay on the design systems team and on the infrastructure side of things. So have you heard about Blade? So Blade is a design system that we built, and the core vision that we had from day zero was inspired from WYSIWYG, which is what you see is what you get, but a slight different version, which was like what you see in design is what you get in code, right? Because the thing is that as front-end engineers, we always work with design, but the tools are different, and there's always a gap. So we wanted to bridge this gap, but it was not easy, right? So there were a bunch of challenges. The challenges are split into two parts, because if you have worked on design systems team, your challenges are now like twofold. One, how do you solve it for your teams, which is basically the team which is building a design system, and then for the teams who's using the design system. So let's start with challenges, what we faced for the design system team internally. First, you want to sync the tokens and variables, the examples that I just showed, right? Like, how do we just eliminate this manual process? When a designer changes, how do we just sync it up with our code? What we did was, we built a plugin on top of Figma, and Figma also has this feature of variables, which is similar to your tokens on code. So we have the similar tokens, like both the code and the design, they have like the exact same architecture. But now if there's a change, how do we sync it back? So we built a plugin, which basically, when a designer wants to change a value, they'll just change it. All they have to do is, they will now run the plugin. What the plugin does is, it creates a PR automatically on GitHub, and like all the developer has to do is just review it as any other PR and then just merge it. So that's all. And now all the variables are in sync. Thank you. The second problem, token names in Figma and code, right? I just want to demonstrate this. So this is an amount component on the right, and I'm trying to like, there's like a component that exists on the code. The way it goes is that this is how you usually do, right? You just inspect things, and we want to just fill in the color prop here. Like, I want to know what is the color prop that is used or the value that is used on Figma, and I try to paste it on my code here, right? Now, Figma will give me like this selection color. I'll just try to paste it. But this won't work because the structures are different. This is how Figma kind of treats it internally, but on code, we expect a different value. Now, Figma provides this nifty feature where you could actually set an alias for your variables, because you could have like a dot notation, or let's say if you're using CSS variables, you could also set it as CSS variables. Now, what it does, I'll just show you. So this is a very tedious process, right? Imagine, let's say you have like 1,000 variables. You like your designer, or you can't go and like just map these names, right? So we wrote another plugin, which is, it will automate this whole process. Again, when we are publishing tokens, this is like part of our inherent process on Figma itself, where this plugin takes up the name. It knows like what it will map to our code, and it just generates those property names. Now, the benefit is, now I'll take the same design, I'll click on it, I'll just try to inspect, and if I just scroll it down, you'll just see I get what it was expected to be, right? And I'll just paste it. So that's it. My linter is happy, everything is happy. The designer is happy, the developer is happy, there's no scratching the head. So the third one, API. I think we have heard enough about APIs, even Saurav mentioned in the previous talk. Working on the primary problem that design systems tend to solve is what you see is like, are you able to mimic that in code, right? Now imagine this is like an alert component, right? And this is like the props on Figma. It says color, emphasis, is full width, blah, 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 right? But what if I tell you that as a developer, this is what the equivalent of it would look like in code, right? You will just keep on scratching your head. Like what is even going on over here? How would I even know that, the color prop maps to like the background color, the emphasis is mapped to like variant? So what we do is, whenever we kind of create a new component, this is like a common process that we follow. Whenever we create a new component, after the designer has created a component, the designer and the developer on the design system team side, they kind of sit together. And this is a snapshot of how we write properties on Figma. Like, we kind of make it descriptive. Then later on, this goes in the code as well. So because the designer and developer kind of sat together and figured out the API, the designers are aware about the API, and now the developers are trying to make sure that we kind of bake it into our code base itself. And because of this, what you see on the left-hand side, which is the props are exactly the same, because this is what kind of a process that we follow. Next up, so the challenges, like these were like primary challenges. There are a bunch of more. I can go on and on. But these were like the primary challenges of how we utilized the Figma's plugin ecosystem to build it. Moving on, like, what are the challenges for the consumers using the design system now? First, like when you are kind of, let's say this is a design that you want to implement, sometimes you are in a dilemma, or you want to refer the documentation directly from Figma. You're like, okay, I want to inspect this component, but I also want to see what it looks like on, say, a storybook or something. So all our components that our consumer designs have, they are kind of linked. They kind of have a link to the documentation directly from Figma. So when, as a developer, you can just click it from there, and you just get navigated to the storybook. So this is, again, right from Figma. So if you see, as a developer, my workflow isn't breaking. I am naturally in Figma, and from there, I'm trying to make ways for the consumers. Second problem. How do you implement designs faster, right? That is what we promised. Like, when you have a design system, everything would be fast. That's the promise we made, right? But how do we really make it true? So we wrote another plugin on Figma, uh, which, because now our APIs are similar, we wrote this plugin where you can just select this entire frame, run this plugin, and it will just give you exactly the code that you want and the implementation that exists in your code level of those components, or like the entire layout as well. So this is plugin. It's like you just inspect things, you'll just get the entire code, paste it in your code, and you are done. Now, the third thing, right? We are basically saying that as consumer developers or designers, you should use design system because it just eases a lot of problems for our users, as well as like when you are actually building it. But it's very normal error-prone process because everyone is a human, right? Let's say you try to build it, but you accidentally say detached or overrode a component in Figma, and similarly on say dev side. Now, what do we do for that? So what we did was and all the deviations, if you think about it, the overwritten and everything, they would just come in at the design level itself. Like imagine if the design is completely using your system, there wouldn't be any case that would arise at the implement stage where you have to actually override the component, right? Majority of the times. So which means the problem lies at the design stage itself. So how do we try to enable the designers to get it validated for them? It's like, can you create a linter for them, right? So there's a plugin that we created, which you can just take any piece of design, try to run this plugin, which is called as coverage. It will just go through the entire design, and it will identify that, okay, what is your coverage with our design language, right? And it will exactly point what are the errors of what are the things that are not used or maybe overwritten. And when you click on it, it will give you on the left-hand side, like, okay, what exactly is the error and how you should rectify it. So it's like linter, but for designers. And for developers now, similarly for developers, because they have to speak the same language, right? There has to be like a common bridge that they speak about. So it's the same design implemented in code, and the plugin that we saw on Figma, we kind of built the similar plugin as a Chrome extension. So as a developer, when you're working on it, you can just inspect or run this plugin on your design, and it will exactly tell you that what you saw, or let's say, is it just following the coverage? And if you see over here, it's like highlighting a section which is like not coming from the design system. So again, these were like the challenges on the consumer side. So to an extent, we were able to fix it. But one last piece. All of this is good, but accountability challenges, right? We say, yes, we will do it, we are trying to adopt it, and then things would fall in place. So how do we keep both the teams accountable, say the design system team, as well as the consumer teams, right? So what we did, what we did was that with the plugin that runs on the Figma, we have taken common KPIs for both devs and designs, where we adhere to saying that, okay, as an organization, we are setting the goal that all your design should adhere to this much percentage, and that percentage keeps on growing. And this is like the at least percentage that you have to adhere to. Of course, there's a buffer that we give out so that there are obvious cases, but we kind of set common KPIs for both the teams. Now, this is what it looks like. The coverage plugin that you saw on Figma, it also sends the analytics to our analytics tool, where we kind of get to see that, okay, on an average, how are we doing on the design side? Are we adhering to our design practices? Similarly, we have the analytics integrated on the code side, which at runtime, it's like similar to your Google Analytics script. It will inject data to our analytics server, and from there we just fetch it that, okay, how are things looking for, is there a downtrend? Like the idea is it should not it should not tip from there, but it should just go up and up. And that's it. The message that I want to pass on is that we should always bridge the gaps between designers and devs, because we spend the most of the time over there. So it's not that, okay, it's designers' fault or it's the developers' fault, because there is a lot of good ecosystem that exists, and you can write a lot of tools on Figma. And a lot of these things can literally get away from setting up the manual processes of reviewing and whatnot, and people would become self-accountable. So we don't want to end up in a situation where a designer or developer both are sad after the production release, but we want them to look like this, right? And that's it. Both are, our design system on code as well as on Figma is open sourced. All the plugins that I just demoed, everything is open source. You can just go ahead, try to fork it, use it for your projects. And yeah, you can just let us know if you face any problems. Thank you.